For over 2,000 years, the smartest people on Earth were absolutely certain there was a massive continent sitting at the bottom of the world. They drew it on maps. They wrote books about it. Kings funded expeditions to find it. Sailors died looking for it. And the entire time, it was never there, at least, not the way they imagined. This is the story of Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. The phantom continent that shaped the age of exploration, rewrote the map of the world, and revealed something deeply uncomfortable about how human beings deal with what they don't know. It starts in ancient Greece, with a philosopher trying to make the world make sense. Aristotle, writing around 350 BC, believed the universe was built on balance, symmetry. If there was a large landmass in the northern hemisphere, Europe, Asia, Africa, then logic demanded there be an equal landmass in the south. He called it Antichthon, the counter-Earth, not a guess, not a hypothesis, a logical necessity. The universe would simply be too unbalanced without it. And when something feels necessary, people stop questioning whether it's real. A century and a half later, Claudius Ptolemy, the most influential geographer in human history, took Aristotle's idea and put it on a map. His Geographia, written around 150 AD, showed a vast southern continent stretching across the bottom of the known world, connecting to East Asia at its edges. It was enormous. It was detailed. And it was completely made up, a theoretical landmass drawn to satisfy a philosophical assumption about symmetry. Ptolemy didn't invent the continent, he codified it. He gave it coordinates, he made it look like data, and that's what made it so dangerous. A philosopher's speculation is easy to question, a map is not. For over 1,000 years after Ptolemy, the Geographia was lost. But in the early 1400s, a Byzantine scholar brought a copy to Florence, and it was translated into Latin in 1406. When European scholars opened it, they didn't see a set of ancient assumptions. They saw a system, a framework for understanding the world. And at the bottom of that framework, stretching across the southern oceans like a promise, was Terra Australis Incognita. The timing could not have been more explosive. The 1400s and 1500s were the age of maps. Newly invented printing presses meant that maps could be reproduced and distributed across Europe for the first time. And nearly every single one of them carried the same phantom. In 1298, Marco Polo had returned from China and published accounts of spice-rich islands south of Asia, Java, Sumatra, and lands further south that seemed impossibly wealthy. European readers took this as confirmation that the South was full of riches. Combined with Ptolemy's ancient map, the conclusion was irresistible. A massive southern continent, filled with gold and spice, was out there waiting to be claimed. Martin Waldseemüller's famous 1507 world map, the first to use the name America, also showed a massive southern continent. So did Gerardus Mercator's influential 1569 projection, the one that still bears his name and still distorts our view of the world. Mercator didn't just include Terra Australis. He made it enormous, stretching from below South Africa all the way to below South America, swallowing half the southern Pacific. These weren't decorative flourishes. Mercator was the most respected cartographer in Europe. When he drew a continent, people believed it was there. And when people believe something is on a map, they build ships and sail toward it. By the late 1500s, Terra Australis Incognita had become one of the most powerful ideas in European civilization. Geographers debated its size. Merchants speculated about its trade goods. Theologians argued it must be populated by lost tribes of humanity, descendants of Adam who had wandered south after the biblical flood. The phantom continent wasn't just a theory. It was an entire worldview. And here's where it gets dangerous. In 1606, a Portuguese navigator named Pedro Fernandes de Queirós sailed into the Pacific on a mission from the King of Spain to find this land. Queirós was no amateur. He had already crossed the Pacific under Alvaro de Mendaña in 1595, and he had spent years petitioning the Spanish crown for a commission to locate the southern continent. When he finally reached a group of islands in what is now Vanuatu, he was so certain he had found Terra Australis that he named the place La Australia del Espiritu Santo, the southern land of the Holy Spirit. He planted flags. He held ceremonies. He wrote letters to the king announcing the discovery. He had found a small island chain, not a continent, but he couldn't see that because the map had already told him what was there. Queirós wasn't a fool. He was an experienced navigator, a skilled cartographer, a man who had crossed oceans. But the phantom continent was so deeply embedded in European thought that when reality didn't match the expectation, reality lost. His second-in-command, Luis V's de Torres, was more skeptical. After Queirós sailed back to Mexico, Torres continued south and threaded the narrow strait between Australia and New Guinea, now called the Torres Strait, proving that the land to the south was an island, not the massive continent on the maps. His report was filed away in Spanish archives and largely ignored for over 2 centuries. The phantom was more useful than the truth. The next major attempt came from the Dutch. In 1642, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, the most powerful commercial enterprise on Earth, sent a navigator named Abel Tasman south to find the legendary continent and whatever riches it held. The VOC didn't fund expeditions for philosophy. They wanted spices, gold, trade routes, and profit. Terra Australis, if it existed, would be worth more than every pepper farm in the East Indies combined. Tasman was methodical. He sailed south from Mauritius, then east past the southern tip of Australia without realizing what it was, then turned north and reached what we now call Tasmania, which he named Van Diemen's Land after the governor who sent him. He continued east and hit New Zealand, where his crew had a violent encounter with the Maori that left 4 of his men dead. He sailed on through the Tonga archipelago and back to Batavia. Tasman had been within sight of a real continent, and he had circled a significant portion of it without ever recognizing it as the thing he was looking for. The company was furious. No great southern land, no trade goods, no profit. They sent no more expeditions south for over a century. The thing was, the land Tasman had skirted was real, but because it didn't match the description on the maps, because it wasn't the vast, temperate, civilization-filled paradise that Ptolemy and Mercator had promised, it didn't count. The phantom continent had become so specific, so detailed in people's minds, that the real land couldn't compete with the imaginary one. In 1688, the English pirate naturalist William Dampier became the first Englishman to set foot on Australia, landing on the northwest coast. He returned in 1699 on a naval expedition and mapped part of the coastline. His reports described a barren, inhospitable land, a description so bleak that it actually discouraged further British exploration for decades. The phantom continent was supposed to be a paradise. This wasn't it. For another 70 years, Terra Australis Incognita kept appearing on maps. Cartographers in the 1700s still drew it, sometimes smaller, sometimes shifted, but always there, that imaginary continent, haunting the bottom edge of every world map like a question nobody could stop asking. Then came James Cook. In 1770, Cook sailed the HMS Endeavour along the eastern coast of Australia, charting it with a precision that previous navigators hadn't achieved. He mapped the coastline of what he called New South Wales, landed at Botany Bay, and continued north through the Great Barrier Reef, nearly losing his ship in the process. What he found was real, detailed, and undeniably a large island continent. But not the vast southern land of the old maps. Cook's charts were so thorough that they made further speculation pointless. The phantom was dead. In 1814, the navigator Matthew Flinders published a voyage to Terra Australis, in which he argued that the real land found by the Dutch and mapped by Cook should simply be called Australia, taking the old Latin name and applying it to the real place. Flinders had circumnavigated the entire continent between 1801 and 1803, proving once and for all that it was a single island, separate from any larger southern landmass. By naming the real continent, Flinders was officially killing the phantom one. The name Terra Australis, southern land, which had meant the vast imaginary continent everyone hoped existed for 2,000 years, was now assigned to one specific, mapped, measured, real place. The ghost had been given a body, and the body was much smaller than the ghost. And then, 6 years later, in 1820, a Russian expedition led by Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen and a British expedition led by Edward Bransfield independently spotted actual land at the very bottom of the world, Antarctica. But Antarctica was nothing like what the theorists had promised. No temperate paradise, no civilizations, no rivers of trade goods, just ice. Mile-thick ice, covering a continent roughly the size of what Ptolemy had imagined, but buried under conditions so hostile that no human set foot on its surface until 1895. The phantom continent had been real all along in the loosest, cruelest sense. There was a southern landmass. It was just the opposite of everything anyone had hoped for. And this is the part that matters to you. Terra Australis Incognita wasn't a mistake on a map. It was a mirror. It showed exactly how human beings process the unknown by filling it with what they want to find. Aristotle wanted symmetry, so he invented a continent. Ptolemy wanted completeness, so he drew it. Kings wanted wealth, so they funded expeditions. Sailors wanted purpose, so they chased it. And when someone finally found something real that didn't match the fantasy, people kept looking for the fantasy anyway. The phantom continent lasted for over 2,000 years, not because nobody could prove it existed, but because nobody wanted to prove it didn't. Think about that. 2,000 years. Generations of the most educated, most powerful, most resourceful people on the planet all chasing the same imaginary landmass, all because a Greek philosopher once said the universe had to be balanced. Now look at your own life. Look at the maps you carry in your head, the ones you didn't draw yourself, the assumptions about how your career should look by a certain age, the timeline for your relationships, the shape of what success is supposed to be. How much of what you believe was drawn by someone else's hand, based on someone else's theory about what the world should contain. The cartographers of Terra Australis weren't lying. They were doing what humans have always done, filling the blank space at the edge of the map with the thing they most wanted to find. And for 2,000 years, that phantom shaped real decisions, real expeditions, and real deaths. The map is never the territory, but if you're not careful, you'll spend your whole life sailing towards something that was only ever drawn on paper.